Hello, everybody. Hope you all had a good holiday season and Happy New Year. And welcome to Meet the Legacy Devs episode 5. Joining me today, we have Colin and Tessa, principal and senior level designers here at Notorious, who are going to be talking about level design. And meanwhile, up here, we have a time lapse of Colin building the actual graveyard POI. So, welcome, everybody. And Colin, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, so like Andre was saying, my name is Colin Volrath. I'm a principal level designer here at Noto. I've been on this team for about 3 years. And prior to this, I have about, I think I counted the other day, about 15 years in the industry, give or take. And the chunk of that was spent working at Blizzard on World of Warcraft. About 10 years of my time was spent working on WoW. As a level designer. It pretty much touched every facet of that game in that 10-year span, starting with like Warlords and then going all the way up through Dragonflight, and doing zone design, doing dungeon design, raid design, PvP arenas, battlegrounds, all that kind of stuff. And then before that, I kind of cut my teeth as a freelance level designer, mostly doing first-person shooter things like Counter-Strike, 1.6, CS Source. So that's kind of where I started my journey, and then I moved into working at Blizzard and basically got my dream job working at Blizzard for 10 years there, and then made the jump to this to head up, basically get the level design process going on this team about 3 years ago, and been doing that ever since.
Awesome. So you were here from the start, right? At Notorious?
Yes.
And
yep, that's right.
If you guys, yeah, it's a lot of experience. You guys obviously you might know Colin also from the World of Warcraft NPC. That's where I where I met him the first time. It's a high
Which
warlord.
one?
Oh, which one? True. The troll in Ashran is the one I'm referring to. High Warlord Volrath.
Yes, there's that one. There's one in Borealis, Urban Planner Volrath. I think walks around the hedge maze. Somebody put that in.
Yeah. So
I don't know.
I've known you for a long time, like that.
I think my kids are in the game. Yeah.
Really? Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, Tessa.
Yeah.
Good to meet you.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I've never seen you before, Andre. I'm Tessa Vasica. I'm a senior level designer, and I think this is my 16th year in the industry. I worked at a bunch of studios, Gazillion, Kabam, NetDevil. I worked at 2K, which was actually my dream studio to work at. I was a big BioShock fan, and so I was able to work with them. I worked on XCOM, which was really fantastic. That was my first foray into like the platform games. And before that, I was doing a lot of more open world, but then I have experience also in the whole mobile industry as well. I worked on Star Wars and worked on Marvel Heroes. And so I kind of dabbled in a lot of different things. Before that, I actually worked in LA, and I was more on the TV movie side of stuff. And I'm going to date myself here, but I worked in Lightwave, which is the old modeling program, not anymore, and a little bit of Maya and stuff. But decided that was for the birds, and I wanted to go into games. So, and then landed here and stuck. Definitely my people.
Nice. Yeah, and you joined, I think, a year ago, right? About the same time I did?
Yeah, I've only been here, actually February, I'll be here a year.
So what are we gonna talk about today? I don't know what this slide is. Colin, you wanna take us through this one?
Sure. So yeah, we're gonna cover basically a very high level, just world design, level design, philosophy type stuff. Sort of how our building process goes here, and how we kind of work through that on the team, and then from there we'll go into like some POI discussion and philosophy around that, and then we can show some sort of what do you want to call them, like progress shots, like kind of like this is, I mean, it was fun to kind of go back and scour some of these old images,
Something like
and
this.
find stuff from like two plus years ago, and then like, you know, somewhere in the middle, and then kind of where we're at now. and just to kind of show people kind of how we got to where we are. So this one's really just talking about foundational philosophy for Legacy, and it's the first one is really just talking about we want to encourage exploration. That was a big thing on this game. We want to encourage people to climb and solve puzzles and find ways to put treasures and things outside of their reach, right? Using their abilities or navigational skills to access things. This has been talked about before, but we've talked about risk or reward. There's this heat map, this green, yellow, red map. I think Chris made this a long time ago. And this is Greenwood, and it's basically covering like various POIs in Greenwood and kind of like the level of risk, whether that's player risk like through PvP or that's PvE risk, right? Like, you know, spawns and things like that, like boss encounters, like what's the level of risk? So risk and reward's a big part of our game. It's a big part of our design philosophy. It's been talked about in other chats here too. The one more room, right? That's a very like extract genre behavior, right? Like you have this timer, you hit a room, you get some good loot, and then you want to leave, but then you're like, there's another room down the hall. Like I can go check that real quick, and then you kind of get into this it's kiss curse type design, right? Where it's like
an internal conflict.
Sometimes it pays off, and sometimes it bites you in the ass, and you run into another player who happens to corner you in that space. So there's that. The community and the players, which is all of you, obviously, right? Like everybody doing the playtests, reading through all the feedback, figuring out like what people like, what people don't like. That's a big part of this for our foundation, right? Using all of that community feedback, and also the stories that come out of engagements and encounters from players, people telling each other where things are and where things aren't. There was a POI, I think it was the Goblin Camp, not to just throw out random POIs, but it was like super lucrative. I was watching people hit it over and over again, and they're just getting out with thousands of gold. And so it was like, okay, we got to go in, like we got to fix that type stuff. So like that's a big part of it too, like watching how people are navigating and just making all this money, and like, okay, we gotta like so that's a big part of it. Danger and peril, this is a big one too. It's kind of like the risk reward. It's using the Chad and rat behavior, right? That's big in extracts. People who want to just W key and pick fights, and then there's also people we want to encourage design in our game for people who don't want to do that, right? There's people who want to skirt the map, they want to get their quests done, and they just want to get out. That's a big part of our design philosophy too. Like we have to kind of cater to both sides. It can't just be everybody on one side who just want to find everybody and they, just go on a killing spree. So there's that. And then similarly, like we're talking about class fantasy and design. That's a big part of our game too, right? Having class fantasy with navigation. The way a rogue will navigate through a space is completely different than how a warrior will navigate through a space. So as we're doing level design and layout, we have to keep that in mind as we're kind of building a space. And it's an interesting problem that we kind of solve all the time, because you have to be like, it's okay if like this person can't access this, but this class can. Like that's very, from a balancing point perspective, especially for design, it's very strange to think about it that way. Like it is totally okay if this guy can't get up to this and this guy can, right? It seems odd that you would want everybody to get to everything, but like that was something we had to kind of break our brains a little bit on, be okay with having that kind of level design philosophy, which is not usually how it goes. Usually you want everybody to get to everything. And then the last one on here is using the loot, the questing, and the campaign to drive level design, to drive traffic, the quality of the loot to drive player traffic and design, and the quest flow, right? As we get more quests and campaign quests online, that will also encourage and drive our level design to go to specific areas to do specific things, which will drive our PvP and our PvE traffic even more.
Yeah, that's something that will happen more.
It's always evolving.
Yeah, exactly. Especially once we get the quest, like you said, and maybe some map events in the future and stuff like that. We were talking about some sort
Yep.
of map events, like maybe rares or mini bosses and stuff like that.
Yep, absolutely.
What are some unique challenges that come to a game like this, where it's like blue sky, open map? You know, you don't have the player on a path where, like in a single player game, you normally have a player on a path. Maybe you have like a bunch of choices, but in our game, especially with vaulting and with some classes being able to like almost fly, what are some of the unique challenges, and how do you design for something like this? Because like you said, some players might want to just play it safe, like follow a road or follow a wall or something, and some players might want to just W straight to the most difficult POI. Like how do you manage that?
Tessa's worked on more single player games than I have, so she's probably better at answering that than I am. So
Yeah.
take it away.
Sure. Well, so whenever we're designing like open world space versus like a first person scenario, Andre, you're right, it is more on the rails, call it. And it's because we want them to experience a specific thing at a specific time. In open world, you don't have that ability in that sense, so you have to make a lot of things, you have to make up in what I call landmarks, and those are interesting and enticing enough POIs where the player wants to go to them and investigate. And then you also just have the regular navigational space, and that's basically the connection points between each POI space. And the combat also has to supplement that. It has to flow into these areas as well, where in a more linear structured game, then it's far easier to kind of have a concept because it's a lot more laid out. Most of the first person games or any linear game that I've worked on, it's very stringent. Like you have your writers, you have, they want things to happen at specific points, so you have to sell that at that point. It has to hit right, it has to hit the mission notes, the quest notes. But then when you go into open world, it's kind of like it's your playground in a lot of senses. It's really what you want the areas to be as a level designer. And I found that, like, being a level designer in an open world game, you have far more freedom in your creativity and what you want to happen and how you want the player to experience that place, that POI specifically. That's really kind of like in our wheelhouse, is when we kind of go into these, we do these structured areas, or these POIs or hubs, what I call them. And you want interesting things to happen there, and you driving the player into that point, and like you use treasure, you use the quest like Colin mentioned, and things like that. But it's a lot has to do with like the architecture and the structure of the space. If it's welcoming, if it's open, if it invites you in, and of course sometimes it'll, like Colin said, bite you in the ass if he bites in, and then other times, it highly rewarding. And so that's like the question, and that's the carrot on the stick a lot of the times, is you don't know what it's in there, but it could be very interesting. Rather than forcing a player to go and experience that, that, oh, I'm going to experience it, so it's not like I have to be hyper aware of where my what my situation is. So when crafting a space, it's really important for that with like an open world, is not to drive players so much where they don't really have the choice. And it's kind of like that freedom of, hey, this is enticement. And one of my older level designers used to say, you do landmarks, especially with open world games, is like something that you can kind of see on the horizon. And like Colin's Castle is a perfect example of that. You see that, and so you're like, oh, that looks really interesting. That's a big PO. I wonder if there's probably a lot of loot there and all that stuff. And that's really what you want the player to do, is to question whether they should go there or not, because then they're already halfway there. So if they don't ask that question, then it's not enticing, it's not interesting enough, it's not going to be something that they're going to waste their time on. And so that's really kind of like a lot of the foundation between the two types of structures that you have. In a much more linear game, you have a lot more very specific tasks as a level designer. You have your mission, you have your content people, you have this that also are in your level that are structuring it to help you out. So it's really fun to actually be working on this in an open world. I worked on old MMO before too, and it was really a lot of fun to kind of like do your creative essence and be like, oh, this is what I want this to look like. It's beautiful. And I'm really much more of like on the technical or combat side of stuff. I love encounters, so that's what I use to really drive people into these POI areas,
Mm.
and these very specific things. Because combat is such a big part of the game. If it's not fun, then the game's gonna just fall flat. It's gonna feel not
Yeah,
enticing enough, and that's what I really love about ours is
but
we have so many cool like
yeah.
AI.
We also have an extra layer of the PvP aspect going on top of this. So then if you see a POI that's, like you said, welcoming or looks easier, it might be the same to another player, and then you go in, you find out there's someone else who had the same idea as you, and then contrary to that, let's say you want to maybe get away from someone, an option would be to go through the castle like you said, and then maybe deter people from, do I really want to chase this guy? Is he like on a suicide mission in the castle? Like, do I really care that much?
Yeah.
And it can, like, a difficult area might become your safest bet sometimes, and safe area might not be as safe as it looks if everyone was on the same page.
Yeah, and that's like the fun part of it, right? Is that you can go into this like super dangerous area, but then everyone else thinks everyone's gonna be there. Like, oh man, that's like a calling card, and you're like, oh sweet, I get all the loot myself.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect.
Sometimes the most difficult area, the most dangerous area, is the safest in a PvP game, but not always, obviously.
Yep.
One of the things too, with just for that slide, is we design a lot of our POIs in this game, almost like mini arenas. Almost that they have like an FPS layout style to them. Of like, we limit how many ways you can get in, how many ways you can get out. There's always these interesting sort of development turning points. And when we were making the slide in the middle, this is the Barons Estate POI. This was a really like interesting turning point on the team where one of our engineers said, like, man, it's really nice to be kind of like enclosed and like you're closed into the POI. We should have more of that. And it was one of those like light bulb moments, and that's why a lot of the POIs kind of took from that one, and you saw that more and more as the zone kind of progressed. And then what it did is it kept people in the POIs longer. It kept them looting longer. It created more traffic. So that was a really, like, there's these moments. There was that one. There was the one where we death matched on the castle. That was another like aha moment. Like, wow, this is fun. Like, this is like, I remember that playtest we went way over time, and it was it just never stopped. It was like it was cool, but like, that's kind of the philosophy on how we've kind of taken those POI moments and applied them to newer spaces in the game.
Yeah. Build on what's already works, and that's really like
something someone asked actually a few weeks ago was, could you take us through the process of how you take a level from concept to completion, just like a top view? How does that work exactly?
Sure. It's a little different every time. Sometimes there is concepts that were done by our visual development guys, where we take from, and some of the slides later, you can see some of that, where we're taking POIs that they made and we're building new spaces off of those concepts, right? But sometimes that's not always the case. A lot of times I just call them napkin sketches. We're doing top-down sketches on paper. I mean, I have books and books of layouts of different stuff for this game, of just doodles and just laying out stuff. So that's kind of the first part of this, right? If you look at a lot of these slides, like the one on the far left, this is like, God, this has to be at least 2 years old at this point, maybe more.
Yeah, I've never seen this.
Of like this first one. This is the castle. Like, this is like, I mean, it's. I know it's like cool to see, but in my head, I'm like,
I like
it looks so bad, like, because it's so old. But
I like the river with the tree. That's nice.
But like, that's kind of how we got started. Like, it was like, let's, and all we're trying to solve here is, with the images on the left, is we're trying to figure out scale. We're trying to figure out like pacing between POIs. There's this philosophy of like 1, 2, 3, which is like, as you leave a POI or as you're about to go to a POI, like when I'm done with the POI, like, give me another thing that's like close to me, and then somewhere a little further, and then somewhere a little further away to kind of like
breadcrumbs.
entice me. Yeah, it's breadcrumbs of like whether it's a vertical element or it's another POI, and again, that's just common, like just to get you to keep exploring and playing. So that's a big part of this too, is as we're moving through this. So that first part, that's block out, that's LD just basically working through and trying to get those spaces. We're play testing it a lot to get feedback as much as we can. Not really any art at this point. Maybe a few like placeholdery type things just so that people know what stuff is. And then as LD moves into that second stage, now we're kind of like, maybe there's a couple assets that have started to roll in, but not a whole lot. So we're taking that, we're finding the block out, we're trying to nail down the play space, and again, more play testing. Then the third slide is, this is where LD is kind of wrapping up the block outs, and we're taking the assets that, the sort of the preliminary assets, right? Your walls, your floors, and the very like rudimentary fundamental structures, right? No details, nothing like that. And we're kind of completing, a POI, the layout. Like we're locking down the layout. This is what it's going to be, and we kind of check the box. And at that point, it's moving off, and now it's into environment art, or what's called level art. It's a little both, right? So now they're the ones who are taking something that is framed up and laid out, and they are taking it to the end, and they're making it look as beautiful as possible.
Yep. And then
that's basically the long and short of how we kind of work through our spaces.
Yeah. And then there's also obviously like lighting and sound tests and a bunch of other departments at the end of it that just make it look really, really nice. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And all these images, these are just before. These are A, B, C, D, E, or whatever. Like how we got like, so this one here, like on the far right, this is the Green Ruins POI in the zone, right? This is the top one is the one I laid out like a million years ago, and then like our first round of assets, they're not even in the game anymore, that we were using, and then like, hey, look, the environment started giving us an amazing castle kit, so we started putting in castle kit stuff, and we started snapping those together, and those are really cool and modular. And then the last one is this is the environment art team taking it and finishing it. So that last image is the artification of a POI and a space.
I see here, especially in the ones on the left, that the layout, not just the assets obviously, but the layout changed quite a lot more. How often does the final version of a level, how often does it match the original concept? And how drastic?
Not as often as you probably would like.
Not as often, as you think. Yeah.
Really?
And a lot of that had to do with us answering questions about our POIs, like I was talking about earlier. Our scale, our navigation of our game evolved over time. Our spaces got a little bit bigger because we have we're a third-person camera game, so we were still playing with things like FOV and things like that. So like we had to play with how wide or how narrow should our corridors be and our hallways be. That changed, and at some point you start locking down like, this is how tall a door should be, this is how wide a hallway should be. But there's a snowball effect when you do that, because then you have to go back and you have to apply those rules to older POIs. So like this castle one was one of the last POIs I think we even worked on. Like it was probably the last like major POI that we tackled. That one and the graveyard POI were the last two that we really tackled, but we had to take all the lessons and all the things that we had learned for the last X number of months and roll them into the POI, and knowing like, okay, this thing's going to get bigger than the footprint that had been built a long time ago.
Yeah, but that's gonna now drive any future maps as well, because now we have that information. We kind of know.
Right.
So it's a good segue into.
It's a cost now and a savings later. It's kind of
yeah. So speaking of new maps, we did announce the Fatui map, the tutorial zone that's coming. It's in production right now, and it's coming soon TM. Tessa, do you wanna talk a little bit about the tutorial zone? I know
Sure.
you've been working.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've been working on the tutorial zone, and um, in games, tutorials are usually one of the last things you work on. If anyone's unfamiliar, it's because you basically apply everything that you learned in the process of building everything else and apply it to that tutorial zone. Just because it is the first thing that a player is going to experience. So you want all the richness of the experience that you've created and that you've already gone through in order to supplement like what that zone is actually like. So, and there's so many different types of tutorials out there, and there's a couple tutorials, in a lot of games that are more on rails. There's some that are more like open. There's some that kind of kick your butt and make you think like, oh, well, you're already a gamer. So like, Witcher does that and it kicks your butt in the tutorial. And so with the tutorial zone, what I really wanted to do for the design is to really take a slice of the game and what the players are going to experience in a session and apply it to this area. So I'm not going to design something that you're not going to see in an actual session. So if you're going to fight, you're going to fight in the tutorial zone. You're going to fight a normal mob that's, it's going to hit hard. So nothing is really going to be a surprise for a player once they get into the session. So this whole tutorial map is basically it's POI based, and it's structured with around the POI. It's the experiences, and it's very specific like skills that you're going to learn around these particular POIs, and it's up to you as a player in the tutorial space to explore and encourage explorations. Figure out like, oh, I'm going to go into this POI, and then it's going to teach you some elements of our game. And then other POIs are going to do the other skill sets and teach you kind of like how to go along with, I think, more the finite areas of our game that could be a little more confusing that we found in a lot of feedback.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that we address those and that it's not just something that's going to wreck you as soon as you get into a session in a real match. And so that's kind of how I applied this zone. And it's really in the beginning, it's just a little bit more, it's more centered on rails, but then it opens up into all these many different POIs, and we teach you all sorts of like really cool things that hopefully will be a lot more fun. And we're hoping to turn this tutorial map into a practice zone. So something like if you get a new weapon, if you get something that you really don't want to lose in the session, you want to test it out, just to kind of get a hang of it before you're kind of just on fly by night, then that can be available to you, because we want to make sure that the players feel comfortable enough, they feel well suited enough to get into a game to feel like, oh man, okay, I have a chance at this, and not feel at the chance to just kind of like on a hindsight of like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have brought this in here, because I have no idea, like so yeah, that's kind of like the general gist of like how I wanted to design this tutorial, just because I wanted to really kind of keep it close to what players are going to have in a session. And so it's a slice of that into this. It's just gives you a little bit more survivability, I should say, so that you won't just get pelted to death. But yeah, I'm really excited for everyone to see it. It was a lot of fun, and of course, like, Colin helped huge. He's always a great person to bounce a lot of stuff off of, and that's kind of like also the process too, is that especially with level designers, it's super important we check in with each other, because we catch a lot of things with our work that some other people might not know, or it's a gut check really with our work to be like, okay, does this make sense to other level designers? Because we can design in a vacuum, and that's something that you want to make sure that it doesn't really happen all that often, and you keep checking in. So I made sure, especially with this one, because it is a very, it's very like a step-by-step process, that I wanted to make sure that everything was covered for the players. So yeah, it was a blast. I'm excited.
And how big is this level? Also, what is Fatui? I see Mel always laughing when I say Fatui. What is Fatui for people that don't know?
Yeah, in the industry we call it Fatui. It's first time user experience. And that's just too long to say for us, so we say Fatui.
Fatui map.
Yes, and this is actually going to be a part of. It's actually going to be a part of one of the new maps, which we're quote unquote calling Farm at the moment. And it's going to be actually a part of that map, and you'll be able to experience this area without the tutorial aspect of it as well. So, but yeah, we can. Yeah, hopefully you guys will see the farm. I'm excited for you guys to see all the new maps coming out.
You can see here in the slide. I don't know if it's very visible, but this is the overall the farm map, or the design that it's at right now. You can see up here next to it is Greenwood, which is our main level right now, the big level we have, and then the Fatui area is like on the bottom here, right? Like this, a third of the farm map, kind of.
Yes.
All right. Well, that's cool.
That's
Are we
correct,
gonna? We're not gonna have the Fatui map is coming soon, TM, right?
Yeah, I'm actually gonna be having the team playtest it this week, so hopefully we'll be getting into your guys' hands very soon.
Nice. And beyond that, actually, I did see a couple of other zones here that I don't know. I see some farmlands here and here, and also Greenwood connected to this new map. What are some future levels, future maps coming to the game? People were asking about the desert one because that's the only one we showed anything about. But I did say there's something else coming before that.
Yep. So, like Tess already mentioned, the plan is to do again, we're just calling it Farm. We'll come up with a way more cooler name than that. But for now, the internal name is Farm Map. But the idea there is the intent of that map is to give players a more a little more of a softer entrance into the game, so that they're not just getting like Greenwood is like we're hitting you over the head with the difficulty. Like it's kind of that it's our sort of bread and butter experience, but the farm we're going to play around with giving you more options to get out and things like that. And it's kind of it's the map that most people would play. Like if you're through the tutorial, like you would move right into this, and then you would move into Greenwood and yada yada yada, right? Beyond that, the plan is to there's a couple images here. We're gonna do some dungeon map. This is going to be a higher difficulty than the Greenwood map. This will be lots of close quarter combat, a much smaller style map. We want to play around with tight quarters and tight combat, and what is that, how does that feel, how does that play, with obviously increasing the rewards and the payoff of playing something like that. So that's in the works, as well as we want to have this. We're almost giving you in opposites. We're going to give you like an easier farm style map into the game, and then a harder dungeon style map. And we're still exploring ways to, how difficult is too difficult. We've tossed around ideas of doing variable difficulties, like coming into the dungeon map with an item, an access item, and everybody's got one, and I'm just throwing out stuff now, but everybody's got an entrance item. There's only one team that gets out, yada yada. These are just, again, I'm just throwing out stuff, but and what does that feel like? So it's super early, but the idea there is, can we have variable levels of difficulty for a map like this, to increase the difficulty for player versus player, and also player PvE experiences too.
Yeah, I can attest. We did one playtest on an early version of the dungeon map, and it was a absolute bloodbath. It is so hard. You fight people non-stop because it's such a tight space and you can't really get away. You're used to Greenwood, you just run. You can't run here. You fight a skeleton, you're just suddenly fighting 3 teams. Deep
down the hall, there's people there. You're
one.
Like, oh, nope.
Yeah, it's really hard to extract on this map, but hey, with the higher difficulty comes better rewards. Big announcement time. There it is. Our final open alpha playtest is starting next week.
Wow.
And it's the final one, because at some point after that The game's gonna be released in early access. Yay! So hope you guys, hope to see all of you guys January 15th to January 22nd. It's the last open playtest, and yeah, we have some brand new content cooked up, including level design changes, of course. And yeah, it was a big announcement. So if you have anyone with any questions, just raise your hand and I'll invite you over. Until then, I'm gonna ask. I have some questions of my own, if that's okay. Does Legacy have any level design pillars or rules?
Yeah, we touched on a little bit earlier. Blocking out, testing, blocking out again is a big one, right? Testing early, testing often, getting early feedback are two big pillars on the team. Being scrappy is another one, right? Like learning how to build with less. One of my faults early on in my career was I had a terrible habit of like running to art and asking for more stuff, like very early on. Then producers would come yell at me and tell me that I'm pissing off the art team because they kept asking for stuff. So that's a big philosophical thing for us. And then on top of that is being a storyteller, telling stories through layout and POI and composition. You want people to walk into a space like, what is this? What's going on here? Whether it's a combat thing or it's a POI layout, that's a big part of the job. And then, like I was talking about earlier, class fantasy. We want to sell as much class fantasy in our game as we can. So, what does a paladin space look like compared to a rogue space? And obviously, like those things will come in time as more zones and things are developed. But we want to start to have more and more of that for various classes. So you kind of like, I'm a warrior and I know what this is, and this is about like our culture and our class fantasy. And then on top of that is the same thing as class zone fantasy, which is I think Cole touched on this a little bit in his chat with Jimmy and you about having class, having the zones have class fantasy tied to them, and which classes go with which zones, and et cetera, et cetera. Still obviously very early and very TBD type stuff, but we want to start giving zone identities to classes. That's a big part of our pillar in design.
Okay, awesome. And what kind of
departments?
That's
it. I don't think there's anything else.
Do you guys work closely with obviously the art department? What about the design department? What if design wants a class to start flying or something like that, have the ability to fly? How does that impact level design? Or what are the rules surrounding that?
It does.
Yeah.
It does?
I mean, there's a lot of limits. You always have to think all of the possible edge cases that can create. Like, can they see out of the zone? Like, what's the tallest building they can get to? There's so many aspects, and that's why a lot of the off-the-cuff things with especially with gameplay, if someone's like, oh, like let's have flying or let's jump really high, and most level designers are like, no, let's not, just because then we have to build to supplement those abilities in order for it to be believable, and so you still feel that you're within that world itself. And that goes for like a lot of different games. They have the same issues. It's very easy to break stuff and people always want to, so we always have to make sure that when things come down there that we kind of go through engineering and we kind of see like if there are other possible solutions we can do. So like for flying, well, how high do they fly? What's the velocity of it? Do they get fall damage from that? Do they land on other platforms? Is it a point-to-point system? Do they have free range for everything? Can mobs still shoot them? Can other players still shoot them? Can they track them? There's so many like questions that you always have to go through the motions to answer, to be able to to create a space correctly to help that process and to have those abilities available to the player and make sense, and also not to create situations where people can just do that and then now they're exploiting the game, right?
Yeah.
So it's always a process to do that, like, and I usually myself, like, I usually talk to systems and engineering and to see what we can do to make it a reality, and just kind of go through the motions of like, all right, well, let's build a space to see how that facilitates for that gameplay ability. But yeah, it's a lot more involved than a lot of people think. They're just like, oh, let's go flying. Like,
Yeah, I'm sorry for the question. That was a trap.
no, yeah, no, it's fine. It's and anything's possible. That's the beauty of it, right? It's just
Yeah.
what you need to do in order to make it fun and engaging for the player, and to make it not something that they regret or really just are just not liking to do.
Mhm.
There's some abilities, and I'm sure everyone's played some in some games where you're just like, oh, I gotta do this again. It's just one of those things. Actually, it's out there, but like the new Batman game in the VR, I was messing around with it and the Meta Quest, and they have you go through vents, and I understand because they put a lot of effort into that gameplay ability, so they want to use it everywhere, but it gets old really fast. So it's finding that sweet spot of like, okay, well, how do I make this still fun without having it a requirement to do that, and then it just loses its glamour.
Yeah, that makes sense. Also, when you add something like flying, it kind of diminishes the scale of of a level in general. I know, for instance, in World of Warcraft,
Yep.
that was a big talking
Yeah,
point.
you're giving me WoW LD pain flashbacks, Andre.
Sorry about that.
Yes.
Where we would spend all this time crafting a composed shot coming into
Yeah.
one entrance, and then the person would just go
No
like,
one would see it. Yeah,
and
no one would see it.
they would just fly right over it.
Yep.
I killed the boss, and then they leave. And I
Yep.
just spent
Yep.
2 months of my life laying out a space and crafting it and making it this really like honed in thing. And I watched someone on stream just like
Yeah.
they just blast through it by flying in 30 seconds, and then I cry a little inside because
Yeah.
like all that time that went into something like that.
What's an idea you were excited about that didn't make it into the final design for the level? Is there anything like that?
The only one that comes to mind is we had a whole quarry POI we made a long time ago. It was a huge POI. It was like as big as the castle.
Yep.
It was like a goblin quarry. And it was cool. Like it was really like, but we ended up taking it out because the map was already getting big, and we wanted to drive traffic to the castle and the graveyard, and this one kind of sat north of it, so it was kind of like there's like if you took 3 dots, you had like quarry, and then you had castle, and then you had graveyard right down the middle of that map. But what ended up happening is like you split our player base into these 3 POIs, and you didn't see people as much.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, like, and then production stuff too, like we had to make a whole goblin quarry mine kit
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say like, what was the word that was I like bummed about it? I wasn't like bummed, but it was like the time and the stuff that it went into. And again, I'm not, the amount of POIs and things that I've had just wiped out, and there's too many to count. It's just the way it goes. So we ended up cutting that for that reason.
Yeah.
Like it was just like, it sucked,
It was
but it's like
POI too.
doesn't mean stuff can't come back. It doesn't mean that we
Mhm.
can't bring things back later on. Nothing is ever like truly gone. Not to like throw out random like mysterious spoilers, but like you can always bring things back or repurpose it or use it for something else.
And what about the opposite? Is there any level or section that holds like a special place in your heart? You can't say all of them.
I have a special, and I talked about it earlier. I do have a very like the Baron's Estate, because that was like the first. Like it was one of those like it was like aha moments for the team, myself, and the design team of like like this is fun to fight in, this is fun to play in, let's do more of this. That was kind of the one POI that I was very like. It's actually one of the few POIs I think didn't really change from the layout, surprisingly, compared to some of the other ones. But that one, for me, like, has a special spot, even though it's a very like. There's nothing like mind blowing about it. It just the history and people would know that, right? That's the one for me.
The Baron Estate. What about you, Tessa?
For me, I think my favorite would have to be Church of the Woods. I really like the design of it. It's fun. It's got a lot of cool aspects to it, like just the huge church tower, the courtyard area, and then the whole on the side portion, it looks like it's blown out, and it's the whole huge dungeon underneath. And I always like that. I love POIs in areas where it always eclipses to something beyond just what you see on the surface. And I think Church of the Woods is such a good example of that. Okay, you have this space, but then you go into this little tiny area and it just blows out into this big dungeon. And I love, giving those kind of like surprise gifts to players. It's always really fun to think that you know an area and then discover something else new about it. And I think that's really like it really was like it's close to my heart. I like that one a lot. I worked a lot on it.
Yeah, that's
So
also.
it was fun.
If you guys have any questions, you can raise your hand. There's a little button with a hand. You can press that, and I'll invite you to ask the question live. So we have a question here from a person named Mel.
Hello, hi. Colin, Tess, big fans. Thank you for your contributions to the project. I have a question. Maybe this isn't necessarily your department, but since we're here, I'm asking anyway. So right now in the Greenwood, like a lot of the spawns and stuff like that are kind of like they're always the same every time you load into the map. It's always the same, and then sometimes you go down into a dungeon and it's just empty, right? And like, oh, I feel like there should be like a big ass skeleton in here or something. So do you guys have any plans for the future for like different? Each time you go into the map, like it's like the spawns are just slightly different, just to kind of like throw things for a loop, or just kind of keep it the same thing so everybody's just gets used to it.
Yeah, so we are going to be doing that. That is in the future plans, in order to make our encounters more engaging. There is some requests that we're probably going to be getting to a little bit later on, hopefully, that's going to kind of break up the monotony of having like the same spawns in the same area. We're trying to get some patrols in. That might take a little while longer, but we're definitely trying to break up the space so it feels like you will have engagements, and also breaking them up so they're not just so clustered together, so it doesn't feel like, oh, I'm gonna have to wail into this like 3-person group and I might not survive. So there's definitely plans to do that, and to kind of enrich the whole spawning area as well, and to basically be able to flip spawns if we want them, and to do it very quickly. And the side to that, though, is that it does require like a lot more systems work. So, but there are plans in place to make it better. We totally understand that it's not ideal at the moment. It is going to improve.
That's awesome. Thanks so much. I'm super excited to see when you guys get that in.
Thank you for your question.
Well, thanks,
Glad you're
Mel.
excited.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. How do I stop talking?
I'm not sure. Actually. You can just leave somehow. I'm not sure how.
Hey,
There's a button somewhere for sure. Or you can stay here if you want.
Oh shit! I almost ended the stage for everybody. I'm just gonna.
there we go. Thank you, Mel.
Thank you, Mel. We had Death Knight with a question. Hello.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great. I was just wondering if you guys have any plans to do like restricted zones for better items. Like in similar games, there are like, for example, darker and darker. they made like restricted zones for if you have better items, and I think that kind of took the fun out of it, because like it's not really like high risk, high reward anymore.
You mean like you have a gear level you have to hit to go into the zone?
Yeah, exactly. Like if you
Got
have
it.
like purple items on.
Right. Yeah, I understand. We haven't talked about anything like that. We have talked about more of like the best example I can think of is labs in Tarkov, where obviously not a key card, but like you would have to bring in like, you know, the head of a lich or something to do a certain map for its content, right? Or it's the same map but it's harder, right? So at that point, like, it's not really about your gear level. It's more about like you're paying a cost up front to gain access for the better loot that you're talking about. But there are no plans to do what you're talking about, where we're restricting, because we want. I don't want to say like nothing is off the table, but like we want people to be able to fight anybody in any gear at any time. Like there's something about killing that person that does have purple and blue gear.
Yeah,
on
exactly.
And taking,
like that's
and
because I
taking-
was wondering.
taking their gear.
Yeah, because I don't think it's a
and
good
we're-
idea. I think it kind of ruined those games a bit, because then you can only join higher lobbies if you have like good gear, and then it's not as fun if you
Right.
kill somebody with good gear.
Right. And you
Okay,
kind of know
perfect.
that going into that everybody is going to be wearing this stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Part of
It's a bit boring.
part of the magic, at least with games even like Tarkov and this is like not knowing, you know, like, yes, we want the silhouettes, we want the reads of like what people are wearing, so you can kind of know like, oh, like, wow, that warrior he's jacked, like I don't want to mess with him. But like a little bit of the unknown of like knowing how much good gear they have on, and this player's skill should be the reason that you're taking somebody down, not because they're just decked out. You should at least have a chance. I mean, it's not like always going to happen. Probably will lose most of those fights if you are purple gear and you're taking on, or you're green gear and you're taking on a purple geared guy. You probably won't win that fight every time, but the chance to win and take all that stuff is something we want to. That's a core gameplay loop for us.
Yeah, I'm very glad to hear that, because it's like
Yeah.
it makes the game
That's
way more
great question.
exciting that way.
Yeah, that's a great question.
All right, then thanks for answering. I will leave now.
All right,
Thank you.
see you, man.
Oh, there is a question from Goofy. Okay, let's answer this one. Do y'all have the ability to look at how much traffic an area gets in Greenwood? Oh, that's a good question. For example, I never go to the west side of the Greenwood, maybe Chapel, but Hilltop and Huts I never go to. Do you want that to be for players who want a safer run?
Yeah, you're talking about like a heat map. We do have some of those capabilities to see where players are going and where players aren't going. It's totally fine for people to not always, like, there are just going to be players that who just don't want to go to the castle, they don't want to go to the graveyard, they don't want to go to these high traffic heavy PvP focused areas, and that's okay. Again, quests and quest campaign and stuff will drive people to those POIs eventually anyways, spoilers, but like, if you have to go get, the golden goblet of whatever, right, like, and it's only in this room in the castle, like, we want that traffic to drive you through that. So the ability to see that heat map, golden goblet confirmed.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Now I gotta make a quest for the golden goblin, whatever.
So we want to encourage all players of all types to play the way they like to play. Like, somebody who doesn't want to do that, they just want to skirt the map and they want to kind of loot and they get out because they don't want to take on people and they're worried about losing their stuff. There's a player, there's probably a player like that in every single session, who just wants to skirt the map and get the few things. I've done that where I'm like, I'm just here to hit ore nodes and herbs and get out. Like it's you know, and the gear is also driving that. Where like maybe I don't put on my best gear because that's what I'm doing. So like if I die, it's like whatever. Like, you know, I'm just working towards something else. But yeah,
I'm the same. I have my rat gear set.
What's that?
I just have my rat gear set where I just basically going naked and I just loot stuff, and I prep it all for this big moment where I go in full blues and I lose it all to the first person I see. Yep, the classic.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what happened when I played Tarkov with Colin. Yeah, I went all guns blazing. I'm like, if I'm going big, I'm gonna go big.
Yeah, that game, like playing like Woods, is a map I love, and like I have a route I take every time, but it's not it's not a high traffic route. But like that's everybody's got their way of playing, way of style playing games like this.
There's one last question I just wanted to answer. It's not level design related, but I've seen it twice now. It's instead of making completely new classes, are subclasses a thing you guys are internally thinking about? All right, well, I'll see everyone next week. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Tessa and Colin, and everyone else, of course.
Yeah.
And
Of course, super fun. Thanks for everybody attending.
Yes.
All right, have a beautiful rest of the day.
See everybody next
Thank you
week.
all. Bye-bye.
Bye.